Welcome everybody, thank you for clicking on this video. This is Darren Nick and we are the Fantasy Football Advice channel. Today's video is the holy grail of all videos we've created. This is the complete trade strategy guide. The do's and don'ts, the things you need to know. Trading is the difference between a busted season and winning the championship. So many factors are involved in making a trade. There are plenty of things you can do right and plenty of things you can do wrong. It's high risk, high reward, but that's what fantasy football is all about. Look, there's a saying out there, and we know it. It's called, if you aren't trading, you're not trying. You don't win your fantasy league at the draft, and we're here to help you maximize all the value you can get out of a trade. We know if you clicked on this video, you're probably a seasoned veteran, but we believe there's even things that we're going to mention that you may not have even thought of. So grab your snacks, take out your notepad, and have a listen. This is going to be a great one. If you just clicked on this video and you're new to the channel, please be sure to subscribe. We pump out videos all season long. We also have one of the best YouTube communities out there. Each week, we have subscribers asking questions on who to start, who to sit, trade options, and everything more. We answer as many questions as we can, and for those we can't get to, our subscribers are super knowledgeable. They'll be answering your questions for you. And let me tell you, our subscribers really know what they're talking about. With all that being said, let's get into the ultimate trade strategy guide. Okay, so first things first, and it's an important one. It may not be pretty on paper, but you really need to know if you need to trade. Are you 6-1 right now? Are you 5-2? Do you really need that added benefit? Or are you just trading to trade? Now, we all know good deals sometimes come and they're too great to pass up. In those cases, it doesn't matter if you're 7-0. You have to take the deal. And we get it. It's fun. You want to try to get the players that you like, the ones you want to watch every given Sunday. But first, you really have to take a step back and decide if you're better off sticking with the team you have, or if you really need to make this trade because the offer is too good. So, how do you do this? There's a few things you need to look at. First things first, you need to look at your depth. In the first 3 weeks of the season, there are no buys. You will have a full roster to choose from. However, once week 4 hits, the buys start rolling in. Something that's vitally important is you have to look at your team's upcoming schedule. Can you survive if your players go on bye? We work out of ESPN, and if you look at the ESPN website, you can click at your schedule on the top to view your lineup for each player on the upcoming weeks. There's no reason to throw away a matchup just because of bye weeks. See what your lineup would look like in those weeks if you decide to stick with your bench options and replace them with your bye week candidates. Let us tell you from experience, there's nothing worse than losing a weak matchup just because of bye weeks, even though you have the much stronger team. The next thing you have to look at, that's the injuries. If you lose your top running back, are you going to have the depth to have a solid team moving forward? A great strategy is to remove your top performer from each position. Are you still going to have a good team? Teams win championships because they are deep enough to be able to survive all the things that fantasy football brings at you. If removing a player from your team, with the exception of a quarterback, severely damages your team, then you should consider moving some players for more depth. We'll get into that a little bit later, but think about it. Okay, so now you've decided you're ready to make a trade. You have something you're going to target. So what's the first thing you need to do? The first thing you need to do is take a look at your own team. You need to analyze your team first. What position do you need the most? What position is the least deep or the lowest scoring? This will likely be obvious, but it is still important to analyze your own team before sending out blind offers. You may have 3 really good wide receivers, but there's one you really want. So speaking of having more than enough players at a certain position, you always want to look at your team and see what you have an abundance of. Those are going to be your tradable assets. If you're loaded on wide receiver or you're loaded on successful running backs, those are the guys you're trying to ship off to get the players you need more. Well, we know an abundance is good. We were just talking about depth. An abundance is good. But if you're lacking in a certain position and it's holding you back from getting the wins, you definitely need to solve that issue first. Consider this. A lot of the guys you drafted, if you've been following this channel, were drafted through the RB0 strategy. It's what we've recommended, it's what we've used, and it's what's made us so successful this season. We still stand by it. Just take a look at the RB0 draft that we did versus the value-based draft we did. That'll be in the link in the description box below. It's very clear who the winner is in that draft. There are only few teams that could have resulted from this strategy. A lucky team, all of your late running backs panned out and you have studs at most positions. If this is you, congratulations, but this video probably isn't for you because you probably don't need to make any trades, which is great. great. But if your RBs didn't pan out, don't worry, we have you covered. Maybe only one running back panned out and you were looking for another to fill your roster. Or maybe even you got unlucky and none of the running backs you wanted panned out. If you fall into either of these two cases, you may look like the team above. When applying this exercise to this lineup, it is clear that if Melvin Gordon got hurt, I would not have the depth required to win the championship. But what we do have on our side is the depth at the wide receiver position. Even with Evans on a bye, we have more than enough options to fill up the wide receiver and the flex position. What does that tell us? It tells us that we need to use a trade to bring us up in our weak spots and take from our strengths. So to start, who are you going to target? First things first, we need to look at the opposing team's rosters. Don't just make blind trades based off of players you want. You need to always look at the team that needs what you have. Find a team that's needs matches your strengths. In our example, we are looking for a team with an abundance of running backs, but may be struggling in the wide receiver department. So here is a team in the same league that we should look at as a top candidate to trade with. They have 3 very good running backs, where it's only necessary to start 2. Now, it's not a perfect team. They don't have an abundance of depth at running back, but who really does? With all the committees out there, it's very hard to get an abundance of running back, so those are most likely going to be the targets for yourself. The important thing to consider is their depth at wide receiver. In a league where you can start 4 wide receivers, they only have 2 that I would consider startable in most leagues. Looking back at our team, I believe that even if we trade away Michael Crabtree, we would still have enough guys to be comfortable starting week over week. What does that tell us? We have a very comfortable and safe playing field for this trade. So now that we've targeted the best team to trade with, the next step is to pick the player we want the most. Trust us when we say this can be a very tough call, but there are a few things that you need to keep in mind to make sure you maximize your trade value. The best strategy that we use is to consider the cost of the player relative to their season-long value. That's right, you've heard it before. Buy low and sell high. You always want to buy a player when their value may be lower. For example, if they posted a couple bad weeks, maybe due to dumb luck, as we know in football nothing's a guarantee, or maybe even just due to the bad matchups that they've faced. You also want to be selling your players at the highest value possible. Each week when monitoring your roster, keep an eye out for those players that over exceed their expectations. Those are prime candidates to use in trading. So when determining who you want to trade for, in this example a running back, take into consideration the past couple of weeks and what their production has looked like. Have they had multiple great weeks? If so, they may not have a great cost to value ratio, because in order to get that off the team, you're going to have to spend an arm and a leg. Now, if you believe this player has underperformed based off their season-long value, then that's a prime candidate. Now keep in mind you always have to use your better judgment because players' values can increase and decrease week over week. So jumping back to our example, we would probably target Todd Gurley. He has the best cost to value ratio out of this team. And now that we've decided the player we're going to target, you're going to take a look at your own team and see what would be fair value at that time. For us, we think a fair trade would be Michael Crabtree and Giovanni Bernard to receive Todd Gurley. Now keep in mind, all these examples that we're using are at the time of recording. So the specific example may not directly apply, but it gives you a good idea. At the time of recording, Michael Crabtree is currently the 7th highest scoring wide receiver. So the best thing you're going to want to do before initiating the trade is to not send your best offer right away. Even if you would give up more than what you're currently offering, it would be dumb to give your best offer up front. The person you're trading with will always ask for more. So by sending an offer that's not necessarily a lowball offer, but it's lower than what you would potentially give up, is going to be your ticket to fantasy success. Start with sending something you would love for them to accept. Then, depending on their response, start to adjust that offer. That brings us into our next topic, which is package deals. Package deals are going to be your most successful way of trading. For package deals, those consist of sending more than one player of lesser value to receive one or potentially more players of higher value. As we know, we are limited on the amount of players we can start. If you have enough depth, trade away the depth to try to get better players for your starting lineup. This will potentially give you higher returns each week when you start those players in your lineup. For example, a great way to think of it is if you trade away a starting running back and a bench wide receiver to receive in return a better starting running back, then directly you will have a higher return on your starting lineup immediately. Players scoring points on your bench don't help you win games week over week. Keep that in mind. So with all that being said, don't just send trade offers to one team. Use this same strategy for any team that it works with and try to see if one of them hits. The more trades you send out, the better odds of one of them hitting. Some other tips to consider: target teams with losing records. Some teams may get desperate and need the win immediately. They may give up players that are maybe injured for the short term just because they need a chance at making the playoffs. Even if you have the best starting lineup and you don't make it to the playoffs, all of it is for nothing. So target those teams immediately. Everyone knows that guy that has a terrible team but starts 3-0. If you send a trade to that player, they have no reason to accept it. They have a good record because the people that they have are doing well. Even if the players are simply mediocre, that means it's going to take a lot more for you to acquire those players. Look for the teams that are struggling. Even if their team has great players and they're losing, that means their players are losing value as well. We see comments all the time of people panicking because their teams are 1-5 or 2-4. They're asking if they should trade away great players just because they're losing. Everyone loves their team going into the week, so when they get off to a slow start, it could be really demoralizing. But the thing is, if you do complete a trade just because you're losing, you are more than likely selling your players at the lowest value. And if you're trading with a team that's 3-0, that has a mediocre team, you are more than likely buying into players at their highest value. So you're buying high and selling low. That is a recipe for destruction. Remember, buy low, sell high. So at this point, you know who you are going to trade with, you know the players you are going to target, and you know the players you are willing to give up. Now it's time to utilize some of these tricks. Communication in fantasy football trades is key. Utilize your message board. We can't tell you how many times we see different leagues that go a whole season with only 1 or 2 messages done on the message board, none related to trades. If you are looking to improve in a spot, let them know. You may be surprised. Someone may be willing to give up a running back that you thought would be currently unavailable. This tactic helps people come to you. Also, on the flip side, let them know what you were looking to give up. If you know it was a bad week for wide receivers across the board and your wide receivers did very well, just let them know. Hey, I'm taking trade offers for my wide receivers, so if you want something, come and get it quick. Keep in mind, one thing you should definitely avoid is naming a specific player. Another team will take that as a sign that you're trying to get rid of this player because you don't believe in him in the long term. Be vague about it. If there is a player you really do want to get rid of, wait until some offers come in, and then put that guy back as a counteroffer. If you do end up naming off specific players, you will see a ton of lowball offers coming in. Another successful way to use your message board is to create a sense of urgency. Let the league know you sent out multiple offers with some of the same players. The first person to accept will automatically discredit any other current offers, which in reality is how fantasy football works. If you offer the same player to 4 different teams, the first person that accepts that offer is going to walk away with the player. Sometimes people can be hesitant to pull the trigger, but if you give them a push and let them know that this deal may not last very long, that may be just enough to push them to go for it. Another great tip that I've been using for years is to leverage the fact that you're in multiple leagues. I know, it sounds weird, but more than likely if you're in a fantasy league with this person, the odds are they are not in all of the same leagues that you're in. I know, you're probably wondering, where is this going? But hear us out. If somebody offers you a player and you really don't want them, you could tell that person that the reason you don't want them is because you already own that player in other leagues and you want to diversify the players that you have. The person would clearly understand, as if you own the same player in every league, if an injury does happen, that's going to leave you in a tough spot, and that's something any fantasy league manager knows. So here's an example for you. So currently we are in the 2016 season, and earlier on in this season I was trying to trade for Brandin Cooks of the New Orleans Saints. Now Brandin Cooks had a wonderful game in week 1, but he followed it up with 2 stinkers. So I thought it would be a very great time to trade for him. So the trade I was working out with this league manager was to trade a wide receiver and a running back for a wide receiver and a running back. Now once we established the players that he wanted for me and I knew I was able to give them up, he had offered me TJ Yeldon to go along with Brandin Cooks. Now to be honest, I want nothing to do with TJ Yeldon. But instead of telling that to the owner, I told him first that I really appreciated the offer because TJ Yeldon is an amazing player. But I do own TJ Yeldon in 2 other leagues of mine. So if anything were to happen to him, I would be out of luck. Now I did continue to go on and let him know how much I really did like TJ Yeldon in the hopes that he would want to keep TJ Yeldon a little bit more. Everyone in fantasy football looks for reassurance. So my counter offer was to receive Brandon Cooks and an injured Jonathan Stewart. Now I really did want Cooks at the time, and he didn't accept that trade, but what he did do was leave it open. The talks died down for that night, but the next morning he went ahead and accepted it with Jonathan Stewart. Now since then, TJ Yeldon has been horrible as I had projected, whereas Jonathan Stewart on his first game back played against, I know it's a coincidence, but he played against the Saints, and he went off for over 20 fantasy points. So these are just things you can keep in mind that can help you get a deal done better. And don't be afraid to walk away. That doesn't mean the trade is completely off the table. Now he could have easily said, nope, if it's not TJ Yeldon, I don't want it. Because I really have strong feelings that I did not want TJ Yeldon, I stuck with my guns and I decided to play hardball. And you know what? That really paid off for my team. So make sure when you're in those situations, don't make an emotional decision and pull the trigger just because you're afraid that you won't receive that offer again. Every day is a new day and there is always another trade to be made. Okay, so story time's over. Let's get back to it. Let's talk a little bit more about trade targets. Now, determining the best trade target is probably the hardest part because you always have to balance, is this player doing poorly because of a couple bad matchups or bad luck? Or is this offense maybe not looking towards him? Is this team struggling deeper than we know? Those are the questions every fantasy owner is going to ask themselves. But the truth is, there's a few things you can do to make sure that you are making the safest decision possible. We always want to buy players lower, so we're always looking for those underperformers. Now we're talking about guys with superior talent in great positions in their offense to where they're going to continue to be a factor. Every fantasy player has a couple of bad matchups. I mean, look at Julio Jones. He's the #1 fantasy scoring wide receiver at this time, but he has thrown up a couple of duds. Now we know nothing's going to change. He will always be that #1 target. And on top of that, he is a superior talent. But if you're looking to acquire a player, you always have to try to get them when they're coming off of bad games. Each week, you should always be monitoring to see the underperformers. Don't just focus on your team. Take a look at how every player performed. If you see a player has had a bad game, or maybe even 2 to 3 bad games in a row, take a look at their matchup. Was their matchup tough? Was a player on that team injured, causing them to underperform? Ask yourself these questions. And don't be afraid to try to get that guy. Don't let a couple bad weeks steer you away from getting a guy that's going to perform for the rest of the season. Also, check out our videos on Thursday. We talk about the top trade targets. We also include our best sell high candidates as well. Now, we never try to buy a player after a great week, but you will come across those players who are just studs. And if the right deal comes up, you have to take it. Now, the biggest factor is that you cannot ever overpay for a player. You always need to leave the trade feeling like you got the better deal. A couple of other things to take in mind. Some great trade targets are players that have been taken off of the waiver wire. For some reason, and it blows my mind, fantasy owners are much more willing to give away great players that they got off the waiver wire than they are to underperformers who they drafted in the first few rounds. It blows my mind. I always give a second look to those players who were taken off the waiver wire. So if you think you found a player who has great value, but something in the back of your head tells you that you're a little worried to pull the trigger on them because you're unsure if they will perform throughout the season, don't worry, that happens, but there are some resources that can help reassure you. Sometimes there are players that have bad games, but also there are players who have performed well in the past that are in different situations now. So these trusted resources that we've used throughout this time help us to understand the important factors, the things you're going to look for. Touchdowns are fluky. I mean, receptions can even be fluky. But if a player's getting a lot of targets and red zone targets each week, then you can rest assured knowing you're getting a player who's very involved in this offense. Even if they catch 3 out of the 10 balls, and if 2 of those targets were in the red zone, they may have only scored 4 fantasy points, but the upside for that player was upwards of over 100 yards and a touchdown or 2. These are things that can be the difference between you being a little hesitant and you wanting to make sure to get this deal done as soon as possible. So all of these links that we're going to talk about will be in the description box. So to find out the targets and the red zone targets, go to NFL Savant. As we know, another important thing is the catch rate, the yards after catch, the target premium, which basically lets you know how many targets they're receiving compared to the rest of the offense, and the production premium, which lets you know how well they're performing with the opportunities that they're receiving. All these can be found on one of our favorite websites, playerprofiler.com. Another important factor is snap counts. If you have a running back and they're not good in pass protection, or they can't catch the ball, they may have a couple good games or a couple bad games. But a good indicator is how much are they on the field? How many snaps during that game were they able to have an opportunity? The lower the snap count, the more riskier the player is. This can be found on Football Outsiders. On top of that, Football Outsiders is a great way to establish how good the opposing defense is. Not only does it tell you, like the ESPN leagues tell you, that the opposing defense is good against a certain position, but it goes a step further and lets you know how good it is against the wide receiver 1, how good it is against the quarterback, how good it is against all of the positions. So you can not only identify the defense as a whole, but you can see if your player could have success against this defense on a week-over-week basis. Now, we are not sponsored by any of these links, but we just want to provide them to you because these are something that has made us so successful over time. We utilize these week over week, and we suggest you do too. Pretty soon, it'll become second nature. Again, the links will be in the description box below. So if you stayed until the end of this video, we really appreciate it. This is Darren Nick, and we are Fantasy Football Advice. We post videos throughout the season and even during the off season of tips and tricks to help you win your fantasy leagues. If you like this video, let us know, and we can make a follow-up video to this with some other additional tricks. And if you guys have some tricks that we didn't mention, please leave them in the comments section down below. Let everybody know. Share the knowledge. Let's all win our leagues together. Some people will say fantasy football is a gamble, but I mean, it's almost a shoe-in when you do the right moves week over week. If you're new, please be sure to subscribe. We post videos twice a week. The Tuesday video is for waiver claims to get them in for your waiver claim deadline, and the Thursday video is for trade targets and streaming options. So give this video a big thumbs up. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.